You're listening to Fishing the DMV with your hosts, Thomas Ahrens and Jared Mounts. Fishing the DMV is brought to you by Jake's Bait and Tackle, located in Winchester, Virginia.
If that doesn't get you jacked up, I don't know what will.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to Fishing the DMV. I'm your host, Thomas Ahrens.
I'm Jared Mounts.
And we are back, and we got a really, really cool guest. Jared, you want to bring him in for us?
Yeah, so Jason Hallacher works for what used to be the Virginia Department of Game and Inland Fisheries, and I believe now is Virginia Department of Wildlife Resources. Is that correct?
Yeah, you got it. We can lose the tongue twister of the Department of Game and Inland Fisheries finally.
What was the reason for making that change?
We've been working on trying to update our image over the past few years. People get a little bit confused when you don't use the terminology wildlife. Sometimes people would think that we were in charge of the lottery because of like the gaming commission. So people just don't use game anymore. And so we really wanted to show how our agency is really all encompassing when it comes to wildlife. It's not just game species. We're in charge of all wildlife within the Commonwealth. And so we wanted to showcase all the things that we do. And I just think people will connect with the new name more so than the old one. And of course, with that came the new logo and stuff, and some of the new outreach programs that have launched, like the Outdoors Are Better Together and the new app. And we can talk about that in a little while.
Very good. So yeah, Jason, I guess I met you probably many years ago. I know your wife and I used to teach together at James Wood High School, and I know you came out sometimes. I think you brought the boat out and kind of did a little seminar type thing. And then we had we're going on about 10 years here, I think, at Jake's Bait and Tackle. And when we moved to this new location, probably 7 years ago, we kind of did an open house type thing, grand opening, and you came out and brought fish with him, which I thought was really cool. And brought the state truck and had different species of fish and had them in an aquarium and did a really good presentation about the fish. And so we've been very fortunate to have Jason, partner with us on different things. And so Jason, start off, just tell our listeners a little bit about who you are and how you got your start in this field.
Sure. I've been working for DWR for 17 years now. It all started when I was younger. I lived in a rural part of Pennsylvania, and I was always in the outdoors, fishing and hunting with my parents, and always knew I wanted to do something with wildlife. And so I had that ingrained in me, and the addiction was fueled further with shows like The Crocodile Hunter and Jeff Corwin. Wild America was the first one with Marty Stauffer.
That was great.
Of people remember that one.
That.
Oh, yes. So good. So yeah, I knew I wanted to work with wildlife. And so when I was heading off to college, the guidance counselor said, how about zoology? And I was like, sure, sounds good. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. So when I got to school, I went to Cal U, which is out in the western parts of Pennsylvania, which I think is changing its name. I think it's called Cal West now. It's a real small state school, which was perfect for me. But when I got there, I had a good advisor, luckily. And he said, do you want to clean up poop all day and be a zookeeper? And I was like, no, not really. And so he said, why don't you go into wildlife management? And I said, okay. So that's kind of started my path. And I really could have went either way. With wildlife management, you're either a fish biologist or a wildlife biologist. There's not a lot of crossover. And so with our school, because it was so small, I did take a diversity of classes, and it just so happened that I ended up working over the summers with that same advisor with some grad students. And we worked on some stream restoration monitoring, and we also looked at acid mine drainage. The streams in Western PA had never been cataloged that were impacted by mine drainage. So we were going and sampling with a backpack electrofisher, looking at those streams to see if there was anything alive. And some were alive, and some had pH that was, you felt like maybe your boots were going to melt off.
Wow.
But yeah, so that was a lot of good experience. And because of that experience, I was able to get in with DWR. But before that, I had a pit stop in the Eastern Shore of Maryland, where I worked with the Delmarva fox squirrel, which was endangered at the time. Now it's listed as threatened, so obviously I did a good job. And then my wife, like Jared said, she was working in Winchester, and so I was just looking for something in Virginia. I had a job lined up that was temporary in West Virginia working with white-tailed deer, and then after that I was scheduled to go to Utah to work with the endangered humpback chub. But I found a full-time job as a fish technician in Virginia and never looked back, and have slowly been working my way up to a fish biologist, which I just got that position last fall. So love it here, and I plan to stay here for a long time, and I've got a ton of experience in the waters in the valley. And so yeah, I'm happy to talk with you guys today about some of those experiences. Thank you, I appreciate that.
And maybe awesome. Before we're going to get into Virginia, but hearing that you're from Pennsylvania and then talking about Maryland, this, you're talking about DMV, which encompasses several states here.
DMPV.
That's right. Before we get into Virginia, what specific part of Pennsylvania and what were maybe some of the bodies of water that you were fishing in that area? Was it trout fishing or what? And then kind of talk a little bit too about Maryland before we get into Virginia.
So I don't have a real high diversity of fishing experience, which is kind of surprising. My dad and we fished for stock trout, and we fished for bass in ponds.
Okay.
We didn't have enough money for a bass boat, so we weren't traveling around to these bigger lakes. And he didn't have a lot of experience fishing rivers. In fact, I hadn't fished for a smallmouth bass in my life until I came to Virginia.
Wow.
That's where I was introduced to smallmouth.
All right.
And so, and of course that was eye-opening. And fishing on a river, I'll do that, 10 times over before I go to a lake. I just love flowing water. And so I kind of introduced my dad to river fishing once I came down here. So I kind of got to play guide after years of him taking me to hunt and fish and introduce me. But I didn't have a whole lot of diversity of fishing experiences before coming to Virginia and being introduced to, well, like you said a little earlier, I think before we started, Virginia's got such a diversity of fisheries. We're just spoiled down here. So I get to travel around the state and see all kinds of amazing resources.
Yes, it does kind of speak to the region though too, because I think when I think smallmouth, Pennsylvania, Susquehanna River, a lot of guys in our area travel up 81 north a little ways to Harrisburg to the Susquehanna. So, but it does depend on your region.
Yeah, it really does. Now, with your job, and I love how you mentioned Steve Irwin, and when you think of him, he's always outside in the bush somewhere. With your job, if you had to give it a percent split, like how much of it are you actually behind a desk doing something, and how much are you out in the field if a kid wants to kind of hopefully get into what you do?
Well, it's definitely a job, that you don't get into for the money. It's all about passion. And, going back again to like Steve Irwin, his passion just really struck me. Here's somebody that's, just seems like your regular, regular guy. He's from Australia, obviously, and just loves crocodiles, and he didn't really care what kind of background he had. He just wanted to show that he loved wildlife, and he really projected that passion. And so that's what I've always tried to do as well. And with this job, you get into it because you love being in the outdoors, and you want to introduce others to the outdoors as well. And so luckily I am able to get out in the field, probably 70% of the time we're out monitoring a fish population somewhere. And because I still like a lot of wildlife work, I get out with our wildlife guys too. I like to change it up. I don't like to just study one fish and just call it, quits. I'm on the DWR fire crew, so I do a lot of prescribed burning and a little bit of suppression. I'm passionate about restoration. So we do a lot of pollinator work, especially around Lake Shenandoah, which is one of our state-owned lakes. I do a ton of outreach stuff. So obviously you got to get out and film stuff on the stream. So I make a lot of excuses to get out of the office, but unfortunately with, at the biologist level, you do have to buckle down and work on data. And I'm pretty sure last week I put in probably 40 hours of screen time. This time of year, granted, we aren't doing a lot of sampling, but that's about to change once we get into the winter time with some musky sampling, some walleye sampling, and then in the spring, it's on. We're stocking trout all the time and sampling the rivers and the lakes. And the beauty of this job is it shifts all the time. So if you get tired of being spined by smallmouth in the fall, wait a few months, you'll be handling brook trout in the mountains in the summer. And so it's kind of a rotation because we have really long data sets that we can look at, and you got to be in the field to collect it. So we get out a lot.
That's good. And that explains too why talking about getting an excuse to get out. At Lake Holiday this summer, we had a fish kill and didn't know how bad it was or what was causing it, and put a call out to Jason. And I mean, he was there within probably a day or two. I was really surprised how quick he was able to make it out. And they put a boat on the water, and they've also helped us up there with some shocking tests and stuff, samples and things like that. So that was pretty cool. You talked about so what are you doing this time of year? What's your main focus right now, currently, responsibilities in Virginia?
Right now, we're looking at the data that we've collected over the past year. And honestly, we take a little bit of a breather because it takes a toll on you, working in the field for 7-8 months straight. It's time for us to take a little time with the families and take a little bit of time off. But so we do that kind of around the holidays, and then we have to analyze all the data we collect, and we have to write some reports. There's a lot of planning and budgeting involved this time of year, and then all the equipment we use that has to be kept up to par. And so next week is our maintenance week. So we're going to be going through all of our generators and motors and electrofishing equipment, ordering nets if we need it. Anything that's been kind of put on the back burner, we'll be doing that now. But I'm a little bit between jobs because we haven't hired behind me yet. So we don't have an assistant right now. So I'm working with the technicians on the equipment stuff, which is kind of the new assistant's job when they come along. But I'm also kind of wading into the biologist stuff. So there's a lot of handoffs happening right now between the biologist that used to work in the Valley, Brad Fink, and myself. Luckily, Brad's still with us. He's just working on trout now. He's our statewide trout biologist. So we're working together closely, and it's nice because I can walk up the hall and say, what were you doing with this set of data here? And he has to kind of train me up a little bit. So but luckily it's all fresh in my mind because I was just looking at a lot of the river stuff last week, so we can talk about that then.
Yeah, let's talk about that. I think if I'm to think of priorities, I mean, I think trout's big in this area, but probably the biggest thing right here in this particular area is the Shenandoah River, the north and south fork of the Shenandoah, and the smallmouth population. There is a decent amount of largemouth. We'll talk about musky later too, but let's talk about smallmouth because I know here at Jake's that tends to be the driving factor. Guys love the smallmouth, the river smallmouth, and so it seems to be coming back. I know I can remember in the 90s where it was lights out. Just phenomenal fishery, both in quantity and size. And I know sometimes those don't go hand in hand, but and then there was some fish kills and different things that happened, and it just wasn't good. And then, but it seems to be rebounding. So maybe just talk to that. Another question I had was I've been hearing possibility of getting the smallmouth hatchery program back up and running. So maybe just talk to the smallmouth here locally in the rivers.
And one thing just that'll tie into that for people that, when you say data collection, and I think this will tie into the smallmouth thing, I think a lot of people just picture just you out in the wilderness by yourself. Like, what if you were going to go measure the data for the smallmouth? What does that mean? You say data. What equipment do you need? So you're going to go to the river tomorrow. What are you bringing? What equipment? How many people? And then what data are you collecting? And then I think that ties into then the smallmouth.
Yeah, that's a good way to do it. So we don't use rod and reels when we're sampling. That would be awfully fun, but we don't get nearly enough data, especially on a bad day, to really say much about the population. So we use a process called electrofishing, which is literally putting an electric current in the water, which stuns the fish. It can kill the fish, but it has a very, very low mortality rate. And it's something that we've used for many, many years, going back into the 90s. And so we try to hit the same sites every year. So we take a crew of 2 out on our shock boats. And basically there's someone at the stern of the boat driving the boat. We have jet motors for our river boats. And then on the front of the boat, we have a big railing around the front so that they don't fall off, because you don't want to get electrocuted, obviously. And they wait for fish to come up, and they dip them up with nets. When they're stunned, you can kind of see their white bellies. And they put them in a cooler with water, and the fish recover within, well, sometimes it's instantly, 2 minutes at the longest, really, for them to recover.
Wow.
It doesn't take very long. And it's not magic, we can't just go out in the middle of the river and turn it on and all the fish in the river come up. It's similar to fishing. And so we target the same habitat the anglers do, which works out because that's where anglers are casting, and we need to tell them the most accurate information about that area. And so when we shock the river, we typically shock along the banks. And if it's somewhat shallow in the middle, we'll go out in the middle sometimes. But if it's over 6 to 8 feet, it's really hard for us to net the fish up, and the field doesn't actually reach much deeper than that. So
yeah, I was going to say, the field wise, like, do you use the same amount of current flow depending if you're in a 4-foot river versus like Lake Frederick that's super deep? Is it the same amount of voltage you're putting into the water? And is it the same size field no matter where you're at?
Yeah, good question. It depends on the conductivity of the water. We typically shoot for around 6 amps. When we're shocking, and so we will dial in our electrofishing box to suit the water quality parameters. And so Lake Frederick is not that much different than the river.
Interesting.
It's the water is a little less conductive there, so we'd have to turn up the volts a little bit, but it's not too much different. Moomaw is a lot different, and some waters we can't shock at all, like Elkhorn Lake. It's like shocking distilled water. Like the fish just swim right through the field.
That's crazy.
And so we have to use nets in that situation. So it's not like I said, it's not a magic wand, and the field is probably like 8 feet by 8 feet, kind of in a circle.
I bet
the
no one knew
probes
that
that come
either.
out in front of the
That's
boat
cool.
are they are the positive end, the boat's the negative end, and so the fish are kind of drawn and forced to swim towards the probe at the front of the boat, which is perfect because the netter's right there. And so, like I said, on the South Fork, we have 9 sites, and they're split up equally between the upper river, the middle river, and the lower river. So it's just a nice spatial look at what the river's given us. On the main stem, we've kind of bounced around a little bit over the years on the main stem, but we typically have 3 sites that we're hitting on a regular basis there.
And
the North
better
Fork,
the water quality, I'm sorry, the better the water quality, the better the conductiveness of the water. Is that right?
No,
Or
not necessarily.
What makes it so where there's better? Because you said like the lakes are different. Like, what specifically do you take samples beforehand to know like this will work, or that you just get out there? Okay.
Yeah, we look at the conductivity of the water, and
Okay.
so typically waters that are really sterile, like Elkhorn, where it's just there's not a lot of nutrients that are coming in from North River. It's just pristine water. There's not a lot of conductivity there. And so with the Shenandoah River, where you have just lots of different tributaries coming in, it's much easier to sample. That's using the electrofishing gear there. But we've been sampling these waterways for so long, we really don't do a lot of water quality sampling because we just know what the settings are by heart.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
No, that's okay. Yeah,
you were talking about the North Forks. Are you putting the jets on there too as well, or I guess
so we used to do that. We were able to purchase an electrofishing raft a few years back, and that really opened the doors to us to a different type of sampling. The North Fork is hard to sample because you basically have to put into a large pool, and then you're really confined with your John boat to that pool. And we get smallmouth, but typically we run into more largemouth and musky and catfish. Those slower pools hold those types of fish. And with the North Fork, we really wanted to explore some of the riffle run complexes. And so we actually do on both the North Fork and the Maury, we do actual floats
That's
6
cool.
mile floats. And so
Oh,
on the
that's
North
cool.
Fork, we have 3, an upper, middle, and lower.
Mm.
And we've been doing that since 2013. And so we sacrificed the long-term data set a little bit there, but in my opinion, the data that we're collecting now is much more valuable. And so we're building upon that data set, and we have a pretty good picture and idea of what, you know, kind of a normal sample looks like now, and we kind of have a running average that we can look at.
And what would a good day
So
data set be? If you're out on the water, what would okay, this is my dream of how many smallmouth that we get for the data set?
well, just like anything in science, it depends. So, you know, typically we look for like 100 fish an hour, you know, when we're sampling. You know, that's a good amount for us. But you know, sometimes, you know, with like Lake Frederick, for example, I just looked at that data. We caught 230 largemouth an hour.
Wow.
So that's out of sight.
Wow.
But the quality of the fish is low. I mean, it's not what it used to be. It's a stunted population. And so, yeah, you can get loads of fish. But you know, if you don't have a well-balanced population, you may not. Everybody's a little bit different. People like numbers and people like quality. It's hard to get both. It's nearly impossible. And so, yeah, it does kind of depend. But yeah, I kind of look for 100 fish an hour, and then, you know, we have different metrics that we look at as far as the percentage, like the proportion of the population is at this size. So each game fish has its own set of size classes that are considered to be quality, preferred, memorable, or trophy. And so a muskie's PSDs are different than a largemouth's. The sizes are different. And so we look at what proportion of the population is quality, which is preferred, and which is memorable. We don't really worry about trophy in this particular part of the world because we don't have many. We don't catch many.
Not yet.
So we usually just look at everything above the memorable size. You know, we kind of lump that into one category. But for us, you know, in the valley, we don't run across a whole lot of fish that are in that trophy size class. But so I like to see, you know, well, I'm not sure what I really like to see, honestly, but right now, if you're over like 25% of the population is in that quality range, you know, that's a lot of what we see through time. But it's challenging because, like, you know, the main stem right now has a very high quality rating, but there's not very many fish there. So you can't really look at one metric and really make a decision on the fishery, because you may just look at that quality PSD and say 45%, that's awesome, I'm going there. And then you go there and you're like, well, there's no fish here. So
now, what
it's a
specifically
little
once
tricky.
you,
That's why you got to look at a bunch of different parameters.
that's what I was going to ask too. What are your parameters? So
Yeah.
once you get the fish in the boat, you've shocked them up in that particular site. What type of measurements and things are you looking at?
So we take lengths, weights, and we obviously ID all the fish that we catch, and we throw them back. That's
Now,
that.
I've seen where too, though, and I don't know the term for it, where you're going to stick a tube down and flush the stomach out. Do you guys do that ever?
Sometimes, if that's usually for specific research purposes. We'll also sacrifice fish at times to age the fish. We use the otolith, which kind of resides in the brain cavity area, and the fish puts little bits of calcium onto that otolith on a yearly basis. And so if you look at it under a microscope, you can see tree rings, basically fish rings, and you can age that fish. It's much more accurate than scales, which they can lose and replace and all that good stuff. So we actually did that. This is a good example. At Lake Frederick, we aged a bunch of fish this year because we now have 2 species that have been introduced in there, the gizzard shad and the blueback herring. And so that will change the fishery. And so we'll have some pre-age data, not quite pre, but before the population goes through its changes. And then we can look at it, you know, 5-10 years from now and see if their age and growth has changed. And so it's hard to sacrifice fish, but that data is really valuable.
So you were saying too, the results of, so main stem, and when you say main stem, I assume you're talking below the front roll dam. down, mainly Route 50 locks and Route 7 in that stretch.
Mhm.
Good quality, but not, the numbers aren't there from what you're all finding. What about the other South Fork and North Fork? What are those results looking like?
Yeah. Yeah. The main stem has suffered over the years. By our data, and again, we have jumped around a little bit on the main stem. By our data, it never held a candle to the South Fork. It always struggles with reproduction. We never get a ton of young of the year, and I think with the fish health issues that we've seen over time, it's just had its struggles. And you can see our young of the year catch rates since really 2014 have been very low, and that's going to have an impact. And like I said, I misspoke a little bit. The actual proportion of the population this year, no, I was right. It actually is a little bit lower. 24% is the percentage of quality fish in the North Fork. Oh, I'm sorry, 42%. So it's got good quality. It's got good numbers, or it's most of the fish are bigger, but there's just not a whole lot of numbers there. And so the main stem, it does have good numbers of walleye in it right now. It has fantastic catfish fishery. I don't know where you can catch more channel catfish, maybe the Rappahannock. But as far as quality catfish go, the main stem can't be beat. And the musky population's down a little bit. We're working to try to get that back.
Are those fish, do you think, in competition with the smallmouth? I mean, I think
which hot button question.
Well, like the musky and the catfish, as far as, and I would think, my personal opinion is dog eat dog world, and anything that's going to be smaller is going to be preyed upon and be eaten. So and it works both ways. But if the catfish population is really high, I would think it would have a negative effect on the young class of smallmouth.
There's so many mouths to feed, and it's not just the catfish.
Correct.
The shorthead red horse are down there, the white suckers, northern hog suckers. And so it's not necessarily the fact that they're eating the smallmouth. People get hung up with like predator eating smallmouth, but it's just the amount of food that's eaten by those vacuums.
Gotcha.
Basically,
There's
all the little
only
insects.
So much food. Yeah, exactly.
It's only so much to go around, and there's not much you can really do about the amount of suckers and catfish. It's just a different river system, and that's probably is a big reason why we never really saw the equivalent numbers of fish on the main stem compared to the South Fork. There's a lot of catfish on the lower part of the South Fork, but as river wide, it's just not the same, and there's not as many short heads either. So it's just a little bit different.
Yeah, and I've always heard too, and which I didn't really understand this, but once it was explained to me, as far as a lot of times too, and you're talking about your data, the population, the river itself too, is it's so in flux. And when you talk about your class fish, that spawn is a critical time. And if we get high waters and flood waters at the wrong time, you can pretty much kiss that class of fish goodbye. And if we get one, if you have 2 or 3 good spawns, then you're good. But if you have 2 or 3 in a row, and where that
you're hurting,
that where it affects the anglers is, you fast forward, when they're that mature size, your all's data is able to show, 6 or 7 years ago, we had 2 or 3 floods that wiped out that class. So that we fast forward now, we're not seeing those big fish. And it's really, we don't think about that as anglers, that it's could be, 6 to 10 year problem. And there's no silver bullet, I think, either. I think we're all looking for that silver bullet as to why this fishery is in bad shape. And I don't think there is a silver bullet. I think there's too many factors.
You're right. When we first experienced a fish kill on the South Fork, it was back in 2005. And that really set off the Fish Kill Task Force, which was a collaboration with our agency and the Department of Environmental Quality, and a bunch of nonprofits. We all got in a room and we attacked it. We worked with researchers from USGS, Fish and Wildlife Service, you name it, and we dissected these fish left and right and tried to figure out what was going on. And we learned a ton about them. And the fact of the matter is, there's loads of parasites in these fish. They live in a system that is not pristine. The South Fork is a beautiful place. The main stem is beautiful, but it's not. It's got a lot of contaminants. It has a lot of runoff, obviously, from both development and a lot of agriculture. And so these fish are always battling something. And, they're basically showing us that at certain times, and it seems to be where it's kind of like a cyclical thing where the population will come back and then it'll crash and then back and crash. And it's just, you can look at it through time, just kind of oscillating, and normal populations will do that too. But this one is just a little bit more extreme. The good news is with the South Fork, they're so good at spawning that the river bounces back. And so it confuses people because you hear all this talk about fish kills and they decide they don't want to go fishing there anymore. And then, 2 years later, their neighbor or fishing buddy's like, oh, you got to fish the South Fork. It's off the charts. Right. Now I thought all the fish were dead. It's just, so it's really kind of confusing, but I think you're seeing on the main stem the results of those repetitive fish health issues over time without the young of the year to replace the population. And so we've been very fortunate on the upper and middle reaches of the South Fork. The lower reaches are still hanging in there, but you can tell that there is something going on down there as well. The population is dropping a little bit, downstream of like Page County-ish, as you work your way down the river. And the one bummer this year too is that we've discovered actually through a post on social media by an angler that some of our young of the year had some lesions and fungus on them, which is obviously really concerning because most of our fish health issues were with the adult fish. It seemed like the spawn had something to do with it. The stress level of the spawn was just too much for the fish. They were able to spawn, but then it's almost like they died shortly thereafter. And so if we lose our young of the year, we're going to be in trouble. So we did a lot of sampling this summer. We sampled up and down the South Fork and the main stem using backpack electrofishing to survey those young fish. And it was pretty interesting because we saw a pretty definitive line kind of around Luray where we started to see the young of the year that were struggling. Not all of them. There was scads of them everywhere. It was a tremendous spawn this spring, but some of them did have some fungus and some lesions and some fin rot, stuff like that. Not in every instance do I think that those young of the year were going to die from it, but they definitely were having a little bit of trouble. The upper river, the fish were clean. They look good. But that's something we're going to be monitoring over the summer from here on out to see if that's a trend that just happened last year. Maybe this has been happening for years, and they're so small, they're only like 70 millimeters. So it's not something that every angler is looking for. So it could be that this has been happening for years, but we just haven't caught it because we're typically not on the river in the summer. We're up in the mountains with brook trout. So we'll be monitoring that closely from here on out, and anglers are welcome to let me know if they see any fish that are ailing, especially those young fish, because that's something new for us.
I noticed too, like during that time, like the Susquehanna River too experienced almost the same sort of thing, and then as well as the Potomac. So West Virginia, Pennsylvania, like we were kind of seeing the same thing. So it's almost a regional thing too, or just like you're saying, it's just a cycle.
Are rivers more susceptible to these cycles? Because if you look at all the river systems around here, and you touched on the Susquehanna compared to a lake, are the populations just that much more sensitive to human interference with pollution? Is that kind of in the ballpark of what it is, to where you see like, I remember again, growing up in Loudoun County, like I remember like all the lesions when it was really bad and stuff. And it was always like, everyone had their idea of what it was, but you don't hear about this necessarily. It seems like on the lakes and then is that just all, am I kind of in the right ballpark with that, or am I not? Like, what do you think?
I think it's a little bit of a combination of things because, the river has so many more influences compared to, Lake Frederick as a great example. There's two small tributaries that feed Lake Frederick. And so the impacts there from the land are going to be very low because it's just only two inputs. Whereas up and down the South Fork, you have tributaries coming in on a constant basis. You're
Mhm.
also dealing with a different species. Smallmouth are more sensitive than largemouth and bluegill and channel catfish, which is the majority of the lake species. And so it's a little bit apples and oranges, but you're on the right track there. You know, there's just a lot more impacts on the rivers, and it's such a violent place, especially when we get these like 500-year floods coming through.
Yeah.
2018 was incredibly hard on our fish population. It seemed to be okay on the South Fork, but on the North Fork got hammered. You know, the population just it almost dropped in half from our sampling. And so it's on its way back now. It's building back up, but you know, 2018 was really harsh on our fish populations in the riverine systems.
Which river right now in Virginia, Maryland, PA do you think has the best water quality right now? And if you don't know off the top of your head, like which one have you seen? Like, wow, this is man has not disturbed this.
That's a good question. I won't speak to other states, I guess, but you know, the Maury River has really never had the fish kill problems that some of the other rivers had. You know, we've had issues in the James. We've had obviously issues on all the Shenandoahs and the tributaries of the Shenandoah. But the Maury has kind of been our control stream. You know, we would compare fish from the Shenandoah to the Maury. And so, you know, it comes out of the mountains there in Rockbridge County, and the riparian zone is intact pretty much the whole way down to where it hits the James. And there's some farms and there's a little bit of development. Obviously, the city of Lexington is there. But it's got some pretty nice water quality, and the fishery is a lot different. There's a lot more rock bass in that system, which is another sensitive species that we used to have a lot more of in the Shenandoah, but you can kind of see through time that the rock bass have, you know, kind of come and gone a little bit from there. It's, you know, there's a lot of nutrients in the Shenandoah, so it's not a place that the rock bass really enjoy and thrive.
The one thing I have done a lot of fishing on the North Fork down near Tom's Brook, Maurytown, and that's always threw me there too, though, because from basically Strasburg's grown a good bit, but take from Tom's Brook to Mount Jackson, like it hasn't grown a lot down there. So I know you have the farms, the cattle farms and poultry farms and things like that, but I always felt like too, that has always been, and like what was new there, like some areas you can talk about growth or concrete and runoff and yards and fertilizers and all these different things, but to me, and then on the north also you have the mountain there, so I don't know, that for me that was just a big question mark as to, I don't know if it was so much man as, you know, something else, and that's like, that was just personal for me, because I didn't see much, never saw much change in that area, and it's a lot of private landowners too, not a lot of public access on the North Fork specifically. So that was just a mental block for me, like what is going on there that's different than say the South, which is a lot of canoe companies and the main stem, but I don't know.
I think the North Fork's a little bit of, it can trick you a little bit because it appears to have, you know, a pretty good riparian area, a nice buffer. You know, you're floating down and you have, you know, shade trees coming over, but there's an incredible amount of nutrients that come into that resource. And if you look at the tributaries to the North Fork, they're not coming off the mountains like you'd see with like the Maury so much. You know, they're running through pretty well-stocked cattle farms and cornfields. And you have to remember that through time, agriculture has changed to more of a commercial variety. There's a lot of chemicals that are used, you know, and we have to use a lot of fertilizer to grow things on the land. And so it's a little bit more intensive now. And so it's not always development.
That makes sense.
And we haven't found anything. Like I said, there's no silver bullet that says that it's, you know, it's the agricultural runoff. But we have found, you know, some certain things that have pointed that there's definitely some stressors involved there for sure.
Have you seen Fishing on the B-side?
Have I seen it?
So
I haven't heard of it. No.
So basically they did this episode where they just talked about the sucker. And it was insanely fascinating to learn about this. And you mentioned the sucker and that how important it is to the ecosystem. Do you guys, and I was just curious, like, how important is like bait fish and forage? Because we always talk about the smallmouth, the muskie, the walleye, the catfish, but in your job, and when you talk about the ecosystem, and maybe the people that don't understand, it's like how important are those specific fish in the system, like the Shenandoah? Like, and you said like the population was not doing as well. The sucker population, is that something that is that because of the quality of the water? Is that because of just having bad spawns? Like, what is the sucker population like right now?
Unfortunately, we don't have a real good handle on it. There's only so much space in the live well,
Mhm.
and we really focus our efforts on the game species. But we don't do a lot of collection on the non-game fish. But it's something that we, obviously just kind of keep an eye on more anecdotally. But our native species like the white sucker, they're pretty sensitive as well, and we have seen some lesions on those fish. And to me, it looks like we've lost that population a little bit, even in the time that I've been working here. But again, I don't have the hard numbers to really say that for sure. The shorthead red horse, they seem to be a little tougher. We don't see a whole lot of issues with those. Same with the northern hogsucker. I will say that I remember back in 2005, after that first kill, and I think that was probably the worst one we had. We saw a ton of bait fish at that year right after that. I mean, the amount of predators that were removed from the system from that kill really caused a rebound in the prey species.
Interesting.
And so, yeah, we're not interested in overstocking a system with too many fish, because we can't crash those prey species. And even though anglers don't fish for them, obviously the game fish that we do like to fish for are relying on those prey species. And so if they go away, the predators go away. Plus, we respect the native fish within the Shenandoah. We want them to thrive. It's just a balancing act between, managing really non-native game fish. That's always the conundrum between conservation and management, is that a lot of the fish we manage are not native to the Shenandoah, especially the smallmouth, which we love.
That's right.
But yeah, there's definitely a balance there, and it's a lot easier to keep track of that balance in reservoirs, because it's the sunfish is the forage base, for the most of the lakes that I manage.
Are you guys looking in that smallmouth hatchery again? Is that something you're trying to rejuvenate? Because I think we had it at one point in Front Royal, maybe.
Yeah, many years ago, the Front Royal Hatchery was constructed to raise smallmouth, and they did for some time. I don't really have a good handle on how many they actually did raise, but they did raise some. This was, probably in like the 70s. Wow. Since then, that hatchery, has fallen into a little bit of disrepair, and it was able to raise some muskie and walleye and striper over the years, but it really needed a revamp, and we were able to find some funds to do that. And so it looks amazing. If you haven't been by, you have to go look at it. It's totally different.
Near Passage Creek? Is that where that's located? Near Passage?
That's correct. Yeah, right off the delayed harvest section of Passage Creek there. We have lined ponds. They have hoppers now.
Wow.
They used to just be mud ponds with a bunch of vegetation growing in them, and really hard to get the fish out because they get stuck in the vegetation. They wouldn't drain right. So this is kind of a game changer. So we will be attempting some smallmouth rearing there, starting in the spring of 2023. It's supposed to be completed this spring, but it's probably going to be after the spawn. And so we won't be able to try our luck with smallmouth then. But I think the important thing is that anglers need to understand that smallmouth are very hard to raise.
Yes, I've always heard
this
that.
is not like raising trout. And so this is not going to be the answer to all the questions. We will never be able to raise enough fish in that hatchery to restock an entire river system and bring it back from the brink. So our plan is to basically try to learn how to raise these fish to the best of our ability, which, we're not the only ones. Maryland is playing with this. Other states like Texas has raised smallmouth before, Tennessee and North Carolina, a lot of different states are seeing similar issues that we're seeing. The trouble is, with smallmouth, you basically have to, catch the brood stock in the spring, put them in the pond, you put in like a nesting habitat, and you just cross your fingers and pray to the smallmouth gods that they actually spawn.
Yeah.
And from what I hear, sometimes they do, and it's great.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes they swim around in circles and don't do anything.
Hmm.
And so we have done this before, even before we revamped Front Royal, there was a statewide smallmouth stocking project that we conducted, and we did see some benefit. I think the Stanton River saw a little bit of a jump in their population. I remember catching a few on the Maury River. That was one of our study rivers, but we just weren't able to raise enough fish consistently to make a difference. And so my thought is that we're probably going to see this as more of a tool to do some targeted stocking. So if like there was a section of the main stem that we had good access and we wanted to try to, make a difference, and within this stretch of the main stem Shenandoah, we'll just kind of target stock that area. But there won't be enough for the entire main stem.
Yeah,
and
you're
so
exactly right. I remember we've done 2 stockings at Lake Holiday, and John Reedy, I mean, he literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hatcheries he had to go through before he finally found vendors in Ohio that even do it.
Wow.
Because you're exactly right. It's such, from what I've heard, it's such a difficult process.
There's a billion fish species. How does a hatchery, like, okay, we get trout. Trout are one that will always be stocked, but how do you pick, with the limited resources, time, and everything, what species you're trying to raise in hatcheries? How do you go about that?
Well, I think just through time, going way back to like the 20s, they started to play around with, which species can be raised in hatcheries, and certain species adapt to hatchery life better than others. It just so happens that rainbow trout, brown trout, and brook trout do very well in a hatchery environment. And over time, they've been able to, harness different genetics within the hatchery system. And, certain strains of brown trout and rainbow trout will just die like a hammer in hatcheries.
Really?
But then there's other strains that do really well. And so our state has specific strains that we've been working with for many, many years. And we really don't deviate too much from that because they are adapted to hatchery life. Obviously, there's downsides to, putting those into the wild if you're trying to restore an area, because they don't have a lot of genetic strength to survive in the wild. And so sometimes that can be a little hit or miss. And oftentimes we'll use wild caught fish to reestablish a brook trout stream, for instance. We won't use hatchery fish for that case. So it's a little bit, we could probably have a whole podcast on just hatcheries, and I can definitely link you guys up with the person you need to talk to for that. But with trout, they were brought into the hatchery to replace recreational fishing loss, for areas that were developed and streams that were denuded by us. We stocked them back into those those reaches for people to fish and enjoy and take out. We don't want the fish to stay there. We want you to, it's put and take waters is what it's called. We want you to take them out after we put them in. And so it's purely for recreation.
Were the gizzard, shad, and the blueback that were introduced to Frederick, is that where you're taking wild caught and transporting them there, or did you raise that bait forage yourself and then put it in the lake? Because I was always curious about like how you actually transport the gizzard, shad, or the blueback, and how that whole process is done.
Man, I'm really sad that you guys think that we stocked those 2 species into Lake Frederick, because it was not us. That was a bait bucket introduction, or someone illegally stocking that lake with good intentions. They were probably hoping to grow bigger bass. But I was heartbroken when I learned that we had gizzard, shad, and blueback in there, because we have a tremendous sunfish fishery. Lake Frederick is unique because it's near an urban environment, and so that's a place where I can send people with kids to go catch quality sunfish. The problem with shad are that they're filter feeders, and that they're gonna hammer on the plankton, and so they'll be taking away resources from the young sunfish as well as the young bass. And our fear is that our sunfish fishery will crash at some point And maybe the bass will do really well and maybe they won't. That's something that we'll be monitoring very carefully. But for whatever reason, Lake Frederick seems to be a popular dumping ground for certain individuals, with the snakehead showing up a few years ago, and now the shad, and I wish they'd stop.
And that brings up, you talked about ecosystem earlier, and that brings up an interesting thing that a lot of times anglers aren't thinking about. And like you're talking about the plankton, like we don't really, we're not, but it's that life cycle and the different species and what is required to grow that big, large.
And how much does it take for humans to, like, I mean, you said like the bucket and dumping, like, I don't think people are aware, like it doesn't take many, does it, to actually adjust the whole ecosystem?
Right. Yeah. I mean, honestly, just a male and a female could get it done potentially. Just two individuals. So that's why we always try to preach, to never dump your bait, throw it in the trash. I know it feels awful to do that. But as soon as someone pours their bait bucket full of shad over the side, that could be it. Same thing happened in Moomaw. There wasn't carp in Moomaw for years.
Really?
And then there was a local bait shop that was selling goldfish that were actually carp.
Wow.
And so that's how they got introduced to Lake Moomaw. And wave bye-bye to the yellow perch fishery, because they love yellow perch eggs. But so it doesn't take much, and fingers crossed we don't have any common carp in Lake Frederick, and we'd like to keep it that way. There are some grass carp. We do stock those to control the vegetation, but they're sterile. And so that's just a management tool. Rather than using herbicide, we use the grass carp to control the veg.
Staying on Lake Frederick, you guys this past year put in some Christmas tree habitat, and you want to talk a little bit about that, how many trees went in, and kind of where I think you can find that on your website, where to find where those were placed.
Yes. Yeah. On the Lake Frederick page, we have a map on where the fish habitats were. We have such a great collaboration with Jake's and with Greg's Bait and Tackle. I love that you guys aren't like super rivals or anything. It's just nice that you guys work together. But yeah, we had a great group over there. And honestly, I can't really take any of the credit. You guys got together, you got Warren County to drop off, I think, 200 Christmas trees. All I had to do is drop off some Quickcrete and some cinder. No, I didn't even get the cinder blocks. You guys got that too. I dropped off Quickcrete and I walked away. I didn't even buy enough. You guys had to go buy some yourself.
Yeah, Greg did a good job on that. We took
really
our
awesome.
junior bass over there, and and he bought them some pizza, and they just kind of went to town, and so it was a good community effort, collaborative effort, but it was good to see.
Well, I plan on hitting you guys up again for that this year too, because it's great to have that type of manpower. And we put a lot of habitat in that lake, and so we just need to keep that momentum going. And it's not too much of a challenge for us to get up there with a few boats and toss those structures in. Did you guys see any fish on them this year? Or did they need to stay in the water a little bit longer?
I haven't been out there to see. I have to check with Greg on that to see, and I haven't talked. I mean, we talked to the anglers in here, but I don't know if they're seeing them on there or catching them off there or not. So I'm not really for sure. I know there was a 10 or 11 pound largemouth caught back there in the spawn, Lake Frederick, but I'm not sure specific to those sites. I'm not sure.
I'm going to pretend it came off of one of my fisheries.
That's right. We'll say that it did. Exactly. Last thing on the river smallmouth too, I was thinking, I did witness, some of the jet boat tournaments going out. This one went out of locks. And I remember the guys being so frustrated because a lot of them didn't weigh 5 fish and low weights, and they were just so frustrated at the fishery. But that same year, that would have been in October, December, I mean, a 5 and a 6 pounder, a couple 4 pounders were caught in that same section of stretch. So I've always tried to remain open-minded. And it might not be like we remember, but it's also not. And just like you were saying earlier, I mean, those fish might be slammed to the bottom in 10, 12 foot of water, and you're not shocking them up. So it's not an exact science. It's fishermen, we go out, just like Lake Frederick, to hear you say that, a lot of people struggle in Lake Frederick, and it is a hard fishery because it's so deep and clear. But your database is based on what's coming up to the surface, and anglers going out, we're not catching them. That's what we're going out to do, but you're not always catching them. So the fish are sometimes in there, and we're just not catching them. So,
well, it's not only the older fish don't only get hip to the lures that you're throwing.
That's right.
I swear they start to learn our boats too, because we really don't see a lot of trophy sized fish in our samples. You know, we did catch a monster, 21-inch smallie under the Route 50 bridge this year.
Wow.
But that's really rare for us to see that size fish. And so when I get information from you all, like the young man you had on the first episode there, that he caught a 10, 11 pound fish out of Frederick, that's really valuable information to us, because we just don't see them very often, because we sample them during spawn. And those big females, they come up and they're gone. They're up and gone. Gotcha. And so if you don't hit it perfect, which we rarely do, we just don't get them in the sample. And so it's just a snapshot of what's there. And like you said, it's not perfect, but it's the best we have. So
let's switch gears on the sample. And, when I read your post on when you guys shocked up those 2 big muskies, tell us about that. And I think the story is, I was retelling that we had a guy and his son in here from Wisconsin. The kid had a big muskie on his shirt, sweatshirt. And I'm like, you into muskie? And they said they just moved in from Wisconsin. So, and I'm like, so I pulled up the picture that your guys shocked up, and those were hammer muskie. So tell our listeners that haven't heard about it, that kind of how that played out in that story.
Yeah. So we sample 4 different sites on the Shenandoah for muskie, and we do it in the wintertime because the fish are still active, but they're a little more sluggish. If we sampled in the summertime, they come firing out of the water. They're really hard to catch. They're just as exciting to electrofish as they are to catch on rod and reel. And, like I said earlier, we don't get, a lot of big fish. And on the Shenandoah before last year, our record was a 48-inch fish. It just seemed like we could never get to 50. And personally, I'd only held 2 50s, which came off the James. And that was just another lucky day. But the James fish are skinny. They're long and skinny. The Shenandoah fish, they're well fed. There's a lot of bait out there. There's a lot of suckers and catfish, and they're just always fatter. And so it seems like they grow, in circumference rather than in length. But we were at one of our sites, and we use 3 shock boats in tandem to sample, because there's not that many out there, and they tend to come up and run. And so with multiple boats, you can kind of corral them a little bit and get them in the boat. And so, I've been sampling muskie since, probably 2009. And so when a fish comes up, I've got a pretty good idea what it is. And when this fish rolled up, it rolled up right next to me, and it rolled over it. I saw its white belly. It looked like just a baby whale that came up.
Good
and
Lord.
I saw, I backed up as fast as I could. I hit reverse as hard as I could. And I knew we had about a half second to get this fish. And it just, kicked its tail and dove deep. And I just looked over to the other driver and I said, that was big. And I just said, forget it. It's gone. We just missed it. And then I see it come flying out of the water in front of the boat right next to mine. And so it was just dumb luck, and so he gets it in the boat, pulls it over the edge of the railing. The net snaps under the weight.
Goodness.
And gets it into a cooler that was not big enough for it. And so we had to transfer it over to my boat. And then, so we started to work up the fish, and little did I know that we had a second one that was, 50, and the biggest was 51.
Wow.
And both equally fat. The fascinating thing is we caught the one fish for the first time, and the other fish we'd caught, I think, 2 other times. When it was in the upper 40s, and we have internal tags that we can scan and track these fish's growth and movement.
How big is how old is a 50-inch muskie? Like, what is the age on something like that?
You'd think that they were really, really old, and up north they grow much slower and live much longer. But down here, the water's warmer, and we're right on that tipping point where it's a little, it can be stressful in the summertime. And so they grow very fast down here, but they don't live real long. And so we've aged some muskie. We haven't used otoliths. And so the age data is you have to take it a little bit with a grain of salt, because we use the pelvic fin ray. And so, obviously they could lose a fin and it could grow back, or someone could clip one off. Anglers sometimes do that. But we did see a fish that was 17 years old, but that was an anomaly. Most fish we see, those big fish, are 10, 12, 13 years old. And there's not that many that live that long. It's, 10 years is about the max for them. They get to 40 inches by the time they're 6 years old. That's how quick they grow.
Wow. How much
Doesn't take very long.
What was the weight on it?
We do it in metric. I can't remember what it was off the top of my head. It wasn't close to the state record. I think the state record's like 48 pounds or something like that, and this one is probably, I don't know, 36, 40, something like that.
Gotcha.
But just the fact that it got to that magic 50-inch mark was special for me. And I put her back in the water, and she kicked so hard she splashed water right in my face. So it was a nice send off.
That's right. Now, you were talking about the tagging too. So what, and I'd heard this before, what are you finding as far as migration, or how much movement are they getting from a given area?
It's all over the map.
Yeah, I was gonna say it varies, doesn't it?
We have so many dams on the Shenandoah. They hit their heads on the dams. They can't move upstream if they want to. But we have seen some movement. A lot of them are home bodies, which is, interesting data. But then you'll get a fish that gets a wild hair, and it'll go downstream over 2 dams, and then it'll hang out downstream for a while. Same thing with the James. They've had similar movement data like that too, where a lot of them are just kind of in the same spot, and then all of a sudden one will cruise. We had one fish bounce back and forth between Island Ford and Merck 4 different times, just up back.
Hey, that's something.
And so they'll move around for the spawn. We have seen instances where muskie will run up into some of the tributaries and stuff, like the cow pasture and the Jackson from the James River, and then they head back down to the main stem after the spawn's over. So it's so they will move a little bit, but
do you think
they're pretty much home bodies?
And so we got the Shenandoah, the James, the New River, I believe, has muskie. Quote me if I'm wrong on that. And then the Potomac River, and I know that it's Maryland, but they have muskie. Is this going to be, in 5 to 10 years, do you think this will become like one of the most premium muskie fisheries? Like I think we're going to become like a top 10 muskie like a destination for muskie with these places.
Yeah.
Do you think that's right?
I think the South has long been neglected. There's great fisheries in Tennessee and Kentucky and West Virginia, and Virginia is just kind of off on its own. And it's a little bit of a secret, but I think that secret's out now, which it's always a balance. With our agency, we always want to promote fishing, but at the same time, there's only it's a top predator, and so there's not a ton of them out there, at least in the Shenandoah. But in the James and the New, those are destination fisheries for sure. There's a high number of fish there. I just wish they were a little easier to catch, because people they get frustrated.
Yeah, and I was going to say too, one thing I like about Jason is he's always been good about putting out educational videos and things out there. And I'm pretty sure you did one on kind of introductory to muskie fishing. And so maybe, and we carry a few muskie lures here because it is,
it's probably going to grow in a couple of years too. Yeah.
But like you're saying, it's what the fish of 1,000 casts or whatever. So just kind of in short, kind of talk a little bit about somebody that's never done it, wants to go out there and hunt these muskies. What are some things they need to be considering to go out and fish for them here on the Shenandoah?
Well, I definitely want to check out our website, which is dwr.virginia.gov. And just Google muskellunge and VDWR, and it'll pop right up. We designed a page specifically for muskie, and it's got all things muskie on there. It has all the waters that we manage that have muskie in it, and the different kind of categories where we have diversity fisheries, where there's just a handful out there, and then we have legitimate destination fisheries like the New, James, and Shenandoah. We all have a fantastic video that we collaborated with Blue Ridge Muskie on to teach people how to fish for muskie, because it's a different sport. You need different gear. You need to be prepared. You need to do some research to be successful. Of course, there's always someone that goes out there with a beetle spoon and catches the muskie.
That's right. Yeah.
Never me.
Little crankbait.
But
I crank.
but you know, it's important to know the tools that that you need to go out there and some of the tactics, because they're a big toothy fish, and you don't want them flopping around on the bottom of your boat with those large treble hooks flying at your shins. So it's important to know what you're doing before you go out and get them. But the reason I like musky fishing so much, and this kind of goes back into our statewide management plan that we wrote last year, is that it extends your fishing season. A lot of people aren't fishing for smallmouth, in the winter. Some do, and it's a good time to go. But people don't like to fish slow and deep, and you don't catch that many. So with muskie, it gives you another opportunity, another challenge to get out there and target a fish that not everybody has caught. And we don't have a lot of true trophy fish in the western part of the state. And that's really why we brought muskie to the mountains, is because we don't have, the blue cats. We don't have the Sandy Creek Reservoir with, numerous, double-digit fish. But we do have muskie.
That's right. I'll tell you another thing we have that I think is pretty popular in this area too is trout. And I think, a lot of people, that with the lake, they're stocked in the lakes here. But I think, I've always enjoyed, your Passage, your Stony, and then, you talk about the Rose, or Travis was talking about earlier, the Rose and Rapidan. Like, I feel like we do have a really good stocking program here in Virginia. And I'm actually thinking back too, back when there was a season on it, when I was growing up and Dad would take us, we would go down south, and, the season was literally, you're lined up on the stream, and it started at 7:00 on a Saturday, and guys are like, looking at their watches, and then 6:55, like a line goes in, and it's just like
Just the infrastructure too, to think about from your end, to understand, like, these are, like, there are let's say 10 creeks in the state, and we need to fill all these creeks. And so a year ahead of time, you have to think about your stocking program. The logistics have to be a freaking nightmare, dude, to do that every year and get them there. Like, that bravo to you guys to be able to do that every single year, because that's got to be a nightmare to make sure all that gets, the dots get crossed and everything to make that work for everyone.
Yeah. So talk to trout in Virginia.
Yeah, I'm proud of our program. I've only worked for Virginia, but I think that we do a really great job and have a diversity of opportunities for people, whether it's special reg waters, whether it's just your standard put and take. We have a little bit of everything. People don't realize a lot of times that we have a pretty robust fingerling stocking program, or they're called put and grow fisheries, where we're putting them out small and they're growing up to quality size fish. I think sometimes people get disappointed that we don't have more spring creeks, like, say Pennsylvania has, but we can't make a spring creek just happen. Like, we just have to deal with the waters that we have. And so a lot of our waters, unfortunately, do end up getting pretty warm in the summertime. And so that's why you see a lot of that put and take situations, or delayed harvest situations, just because the resources just won't sustain the fish. But again, I point people back to our website. It's such a valuable tool. We have the trout guide on the website there, and it has everything you need. One of the coolest features of the website is the where to go trout fishing map, the ArcGIS map that's there. It has all of our stock trout waters, all of our special reg waters, and even all of the wild trout streams in the state. And so you can just spend hours on there, finding new places to fish. The other program that I'm really proud of is the Virginia Trout Slam Challenge, which this is the third season for that. And that's the challenge to anglers to catch 3 species of trout in one day: the brook, brown, and rainbow. And we have a page dedicated to that as well. Of course, me, I've got the video on there as well on Steve Reeser and I are out there failing to complete the challenge, but that's why it's a challenge, right?
That's right.
But it's just something new that anglers can target. Again, we're trying to reinvigorate anglers that may have lapsed. We're trying to recruit new anglers, and then retain the ones we have. It's called the R3 program. And so that's kind of all built into some of these different outreach programs that we're working on now. to try to continue to keep anglers interested. And so that page that's dedicated to the Trout Slam has pre-planned trips on there. So if you're, if you don't have a lot of time, you can just go down through there. It's arranged by county, and we already have some streams where you can try to catch all 3 different species in the same day. And then we collaborated with a local artist that made an awesome decal for that. And so you can purchase your completed Trout Slam sticker and display it proudly. And we're getting close to 1,000 anglers that have completed the Trout Slam.
Wow, that's pretty
That's
cool.
so
I
cool.
asked for an update on the number last week, and our aquatics ed coordinator said that we were getting pretty close. So
awesome.
I'm going to try to work with the outreach department and maybe do something special for the 1,000th angler that catches the Trout Slam. So hopefully stay tuned for that. We'll see if we can pull something off there. But just running through a few more quick things about our stock trout program. You could also look at our stock trout management plan, which is basically our guiding document going into the future with trout fishing. And you can see some of our goals, objectives involved with that. We also have a wild trout management plan on there as well. We have loads of kids fishing days, Heritage Day, urban trout waters. That's all back in effect. We had to take a little pause there during COVID, but those are going to be back this year. One other thing that's new is the youth only stock trout waters. That was part of our stock trout management plan. This is trout waters that only anglers 15 and under can fish. And so they don't need a trout license. And you can take your kids to those resources and learn to fish for trout without the combat fishing of fishing next to an adult. So those are pretty sneaky good waters. There's one just outside of Waynesboro, and not a lot of pressure on those waters. And I know quite a few adults that take their kids there, and they have a really, really good time. They kind of have the water to themselves. So maybe not after this podcast, but again, we're all about getting people out and fishing. The last thing I'll say about a trout program, something unique this year, are the tiger trout. Have you guys heard of tiger trout before?
Yeah,
I've never heard of that.
Tiger trout are a mix between brown trout and brook trout.
Oh, wow.
And so this actually does happen in the wild every now and then when a male brook trout will spawn with a female brown, because their spawns are somewhat close. They both are fall spawners. And they, look up some pictures on the tiger trout. They are gorgeous fish. They kind of have the wormy pattern of the brook trout, but the colors of a brown. And honestly, it can be all over the map. I've seen some that look like Dalmatians, like they're wild looking fish. But it's an experiment that we're doing with our hatcheries, because we're always looking for good survival and good growth in our hatcheries. In any type of agricultural environment, which is basically what these hatcheries are, you're always looking at ways to combat different disease issues or bacterial issues. And so the tiger trout was one that we wanted to try to see how they survive. And so far the news is pretty good. And so anglers will be seeing them. They're already seeing them on the water this year. And so we're getting lots of curious phone calls about what's the story with these tiger trout.
For the anglers at home, where can they get some information on how to catch trout, and what are your 2 top tips for trout? Does one bait work for all 3 species? Does certain species have something else a little different if you want to actually pursue them?
I think you can find tips on catching trout just about anywhere. YouTube would be a good place to start. We're always lacking for mentors, out there in the outdoors. And so if you can find a seasoned trout angler, 9 times out of 10, they're going to want to take you trout fishing. And so I always recommend trying to find a mentor to get some local, real-time advice. But trout are a little bit different. My boss always says that brook trout will bite a bare hook, so go out with a bare hook. But rainbows and brooks, rainbows, they are keyed in more to insects. Typically, they will eat some minnows every now and then. But as far as the wild fish go, they tend to like insects. the brook trout, they can't be picky. You know, their waters are usually very small. Sometimes it can be pool to pool. So that they are easier to catch because they can't be picky, and they have to just eat what they can find. And so they're going to eat crayfish, and they're going to eat minnows and bugs, you know, you name it. They're just trying to survive out there. The brown trout, of course, will eat insects too, but as they get larger, they become more piscivorous, which means they're going to be feeding on bait fish. And so if you're after the larger brown trout, a lot of times you're going to want to look for like a minnow fly type imitation. You can do very well with like a rapala or a live minnow with those brown trout. And so we go through a little bit of that in that Virginia Trout Slam video as well.
What's the biggest trout you've caught so far? What's your PR?
Personally or shocking?
Personally.
Personally, probably a steelhead. Yeah, probably a steelhead up in Erie. That's probably my personal best up there. Shocking, the one that pops into my head, Mossy Creek, 26 inches.
Wow.
Monster.
Wow.
Yeah, it's monster.
Dang.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it surprised the heck out of us, honestly. We routinely get brown trout over 20 inches in the Jackson tailwaters and Mossy Creek. By routinely, you know, just 1 to 3 per year, you know, that kind of thing. So you get a little bit numb to it after a while. You know, it's a nice fish and all, but it's not like catching it on rod and reel for sure. But yeah, awesome. that brown and mossy for such a small stream, geez, that was a monster.
That's all. That really is cool.
That's really cool.
Yeah, you've mentioned you know, we talk, and you all do have a great website. I mean, I know we refer people, probably number one question when they come in, where can we fish? You know, where to fish? And so you got to go through a series of questions, whether they have a boat, a kayak, canoe, you know, different things, bank fishing. But your all's website is really good, and we try to direct people there because you really do have just about everything you need to know on that website of where to fish, and then, you know, what to use. What are some other, maybe talk a little bit more to the website and any other resources that people can go to tap into you guys and what you offer in the state?
Yeah, I would recommend checking out the website and signing up for Notes from the Field. I don't know if you guys put stuff in liner notes, but you know, you could definitely link some of this stuff to that. Notes from the Field is cool because, you know, you can sign up for different types of subjects. So if you're into fishing, you can sign up for fishing. There's a hunting one, there's just wildlife watching. I sign up for all of them. And we're basically, you know, sending you mailers, you know, pretty much once a month for each one. And so that's where you'll find some of the videos that I make and all the videos that our agency makes. And so if you're interested in some of the local water stuff, you know, that's a good thing to sign up for because, you know, the stuff that we make in our regional office will be going there. Of course, you know, our YouTube channel, which is the Department of Wildlife Resources, you know, that has a ton of different information and videos on it. And then, of course, Facebook and Instagram is a good one to follow as well. But yeah, just our website, you know, I'm proud of it. You know, looking at some of the other states' websites, it's hard to navigate them. But I like the fact that you can just click on fishing and then lakes or rivers, and then you're off to the races, or the trout guide. Those are the big three right there.
It's fantastic. It's really.
I'm glad you guys like it.
No, it is. Yeah, and your app is really good too. I can remember the days of, you know, and we still have the books, you know, looking through the books. You know, but I'm in the woods, and it's the typical, you're in the woods, and I heard some turkey, and I knew they were flying off the roost. So it's like, pull out the app, click on it, you know, and see if it's in season, you know. That's been really nice.
And the YouTube videos, because that's the one thing that really spun me to do this channel was I think you did an episode on Back Bay, and it was on your YouTube channel. And I was like, this place exists? Where the hell is this place? And it's just so great that you guys are starting to advertise all those cool, like just off the wall fisheries. And then you realize like this place has got a lot of really cool places, and you guys are highlighting not just the big ones, but like these really cool gems.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we get to go to so many neat places, and you know, Lake Moomaw has grown quite a bit in the past couple of years. It's not as busy as, you know, Lake Anna or Smith Mountain or something like that. But when I first worked here and went out there, I just couldn't I couldn't understand it. I was like, you know, these people loading up Lake Anna and Smith Mountain, why?
Right.
You go to Lake Moomaw, it's the most beautiful place in Virginia. So, and it's got a tremendous bass fishery. I mean, the smallmouth in that lake are just off the charts right now. So
Especially
definitely worth the drive to Moomaw.
Absolutely. In our age, like I can just remember, we didn't have we really didn't have the technology. We didn't have the cell phones. You pretty much open the top of a map and find the water and then the road, and you go out and explore, which I kind of like that exploration. But there's really I'm just still amazed with the technology at our fingertips now, how you can't find this stuff because it's out there. All you got to do is search it. And
Yep.
But, I guess
we've got pretty good amenities at a lot of the lakes too, even the ones that are way out. Like another cool place that's kind of a diamond in the rough is the Back Creek Rec Ponds. Have you ever heard of those two ponds? Way out in western Bath County, just fantastic place to go. They're small ponds. You can put a John boat on one of them, but a good place to go. It's got excellent wade fishing access around it. Cool campsite there. No cell service, which is a rarity now.
That's right.
Just a cool spot to go. So even if you're out in the middle of nowhere, there's, still some pretty good places that you can camp and have a good weekend. Same with Lake Moomaw. It's awesome campgrounds there. So we're spoiled. We got a lot of good places to go.
No, we really are. We really are.
Now, you mentioned earlier too, like if people wanted to get a hold of you, if they had a question or something, do you have? Well, I guess we'll link that information.
Yep. Everything will be everything will be linked in the episode description, also on your guys' website and the release of the video. And then also, guys, please let us know just other questions. So hopefully, we can have you on again. We can have some fan questions to be able to ask, or maybe steer you guys to the right place.
Yeah, so they can email me directly with local questions. But if it gets beyond the Shenandoah Valley, you just hit contact us on the main website page. Just scroll to the bottom, and you can pick through a few different options. Like, obviously, if it's like a wildlife crime or a nuisance wildlife thing, there's a section for that. But if it's just a general fish question about blue cats, for example, it just goes to the web, and they then funnel those questions to the appropriate biologist. But yeah, don't ask me about blue cats on the James River, because I won't have a real strong answer for you. I've definitely gone there and sampled some, but I don't know what the state of the fishery is. So
what is your
don't fill up my inbox.
What is your region that you cover?
Good question. It's basically the Route 81 corridor, and so I should say district. Our region is pretty large. It goes from Winchester all the way down to Lexington, and then straight across to just north of Richmond, all the way up through Nova. Wow. We have two offices that cover both sides of the region. So we call it Region 4 West and Region 4 East. And so myself, Brad Fink, Steve Reeser, we're in Region 4 West. And so my district is the Shenandoah Valley. And so I have a number of those small impoundments in there, like Lake Frederick and Arrowhead and Lara, as well as the Shenandoah River system. And then, obviously Brad and Steve kind of cover the Maury and the Jackson, the cow pasture, Moomaw, Back Creek Rec Ponds, Lake Robertson, stuff like that. So we all work together, but at the end of the day, I'm the point person for the Shenandoah River drainage.
Good stuff. That's great stuff.
Do you have anything else you want to add about
no
fishing?
I continue to point people back to our website. We've got a lot of programs there. Two quick ones that I'll highlight is our Restore the Wild program. Not everybody is into hunting and fishing, and we derive our funding from those license sales. We don't get any general tax dollars from the General Assembly. And so we came up with the Restore the Wild program to diversify our funding streams a little bit and have the opportunity for members of the general public to give back directly to habitat conservation and restoration. And so the money that we get from the Restore the Wild program goes right back into, pollinator restoration or stream bank restoration, stuff like that. So your money is going directly back into the resource, which is really cool. Another one is the Shop DWR program. which, we have all sorts of cool swag. I'm sure you guys have seen that in some of the videos and stuff with our different shirts and hats and stickers and bags, you name it. That money goes right to connecting youth with the outdoors. So if a teacher wants binoculars for their kids, notebooks, fishing rods, they can sign up for that grant program and then get some funding to get kids outside. So it's two really rewarding opportunities to give back to conservation and to connect youth to the outdoors. And Christmas is coming, so it's a great time to do it. Of course, this will probably go out in the spring, and this won't make any sense now.
That's funny. And they also do, back to trout, I know they, I'm assuming they still do the trout in the classroom, where they're raising the trout in the classroom. And I think Patty Run, which is right down the road from us, less than about 5 miles, a small little stream that where they'll, once they've raised them, say at Millbrook or the different elementary schools, they'll put them in there, work with Winchester Trout Unlimited. And again, that's another little small place that people may drive over every day and not realize that there's, trout in that area. So
our agency collaborated with Trout Unlimited years ago, and we raise the eggs of brook trout, and then we help divvy them out to teachers throughout the state. And at one point we were close to 200 classrooms throughout the state that were in the Trout in the Classroom program. So all those kids are getting inundated with water quality and animal husbandry and just a passion for trout. And then they usually, release them back into the wild. And so the kids get to get outdoors and get wet and check out macroinvertebrates. And sometimes we'll show up with a shock boat and show them the different fish in the river.
That's cool. Let me end with this too. It's something where I know as a state, I'm sure like you're always bombarded, like if we're not catching fish, it's your fault, type of thing. But what are some things, and we're always looking for you to, provide a great resource for us, but let's end with, what are some things that, when you think about conservation, what are some things that you need from us as anglers and outdoorsmen that can help preserve this resource that we have in the state of Virginia?
I think the collaborations and communication that we currently have are good. They can always get better. And so I think just working with angler groups like yourself and bait shops, that's a wealth of information for us. The more that I can talk to anglers and explain our programs and explain what these fish need to survive and thrive is incredibly valuable, because then the anglers can speak to the local landowners and the locals on the ground that may not necessarily want to hear from me. I may not speak their language, so to speak. And so I think it's just important for everyone to know, that these fish are sensitive and they need good water quality, and we're all involved. We have an impact, and so it's our responsibility to look after them, not only because we want to catch them, but because they're valuable to have as far as our local ecology goes. And so they're a species worth protecting.
Jason, really appreciate you.
Thank you so much, sir.
I've very much enjoyed this. And one thing is funny, every time we've learned something new. Every
time.
It's like, I didn't know that.
It's you glisten those little morsels from it. But thank you so much, sir. Again, everything will be in the episode description down below. My name is Thomas Ahrens with Fishing the DMV.
Jared Mounts.
We'll see you next time.
Thanks,
Bye.
Jason.
You're listening to Fishing the DMV with your hosts, Thomas Ahrens and Jared Mounts. Fishing the DMV is brought to you by Jake's Bait and Tackle, located in Winchester, Virginia.